Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Jeffrey Epstein Show. I'm your host, Bobbycapucci, and this is Daily Drop number 371. There are over 100 accusers who are seeking restitution from Jeffrey Epstein's estate, according to a new report from the New York Times today. And I feel like that's just the tip of the iceberg, right? There are obviously more women and girls than this, and I'm honestly shocked that we haven't seen even a larger number of them come forward. But over 100 so far are seeking a payout from Jeffrey Epstein's estate. And guess what? I hope that every last dollar goes to these survivors. They have been absolutely treated horribly for decades by not only Jeffrey Epstein and his band of deviants, but by the federal government in the United States of America and governments elsewhere. So I hope every last dollar, down to the very last penny, gets squeezed out of this estate and gets distributed to these girls who were abused by this sick bastard and his deviant friends. And it looks like we're starting to get to a point where there's some payouts coming out, right? We know that Leslie Groff just had a settlement dropped that was brought against her by Jennifer Arias, and that obviously goes hand in hand with Jennifer getting a payout from the compensation fund. Now, of course, Groff and her legal team, they tried to, spin it as if it was some sort of victory, but in reality, it was just part and parcel for a payout in the survivors fund here. So over 100 girls, and I really believe it's just the tip of the iceberg, right? I think as this story continues to grow and we see it have more people added to the criminal portion of it, I think you're going to see more and more girls come out and go on the record about the abuse that they suffered at the hands of Jeffrey Epstein and his associates. But I think that 100 or so accusers thus far is at least a decent start, right? If anyone has ever deserved to get some restitution or a payout in a case like this, it's these girls who have been absolutely treated like they don't even matter by not only Epstein and his people, but by the very people we elect and put into positions to protect the most vulnerable amongst us. So not only should this money get paid out, it should get paid out quickly. And this chapter should be closed for these girls. They should be able to move on and do whatever it is that they want to do with the rest of their lives. And if they choose to testify against Maxwell and her cohorts in the upcoming criminal portion, then that will be the exclamation point for them, right? Not only did I take your money, not only did I take all of your dirty ass money, but I helped put Ghislaine Maxwell and all of your nasty ass associates in prison forever. That's what I call drawing a line under something or slapping an exclamation point on it. And I think we're going to see a lot of that as this trial continues to grow and as we get closer to the actual, hearing portion of the Maxwell trial. I think there's going to be girls and witnesses lined up to testify against this lady. Our article today is from the New York Times, and the headline, "More than 100 accusers seek restitution from Jeffrey Epstein's estate." A victim compensation fund has already paid out millions of dollars, with more claims expected to be approved in the coming weeks. This article was authored by Matthew Goldstein. And while it's nice for the New York Times to finally get on the bus here, if you remember, Chris Spargo over at OK Magazine, which the people at the Times would turn their nose up at, I'm sure, was all over this and has been talking about this for a few weeks. And now the Times gets on it. Now the Times is reporting the story. With all of the resources that the Times has, don't you think they'd have a few reporters dedicated to nothing but this story? You would think that would be a good idea, right? This is a pretty huge story, pretty impactful story. It spans continents, spans many different layers of power, and it includes everything that the media usually loves. But for some reason, they're a few weeks behind an outlet like OK Magazine. So it shows you really where the New York Times priorities are, where they have been, and where you can expect them to be moving forward. I'm pretty sure they'll be busy laying cover fire for the new president and his administration, and they won't have time for any hard-charging, good investigative journalism. But the good thing is, we don't have to rely on the New York Times anymore, or the New York, or the Washington Post, or any of these old legacy media outlets. And that's because independent journalism is really getting a foothold, and the work that's being done by those that are providing the content is resonating with people. People are done getting BS'd. People don't want to be gaslit no more. People want the really real. Just give it to people, unfiltered and true, or if it's your opinion, let them know it's your opinion. But people are done being gaslit. Nobody wants to be lied to anymore, and nobody wants to be strung along like a little puppet. And you see that as a lot of these old legacy institutions are floundering in a lot of financial trouble. And I think when Trump is gone and they have nothing left to talk about, I'm sure nobody wants to hear about Mitch McConnell all day, every day, or insert any of these other spineless, weak-ass Republicans. Nobody wants to hear about that all day. So these outlets are going to be forced to actually, cover the news once again. And I don't know if they're going to be able to do that. So it's going to be interesting moving forward. But so many people, and when I say so many people, I don't just mean of one political affiliation. I mean so many people on both sides of the aisle and everybody in between has lost faith in these sorts of institutions like the New York Times or the Washington Post. There's no reason that OK Magazine should be scooping them on a story like this. But they did. And again, that's a tip of the hat to Chris Spargo, doing great work down there. But the New York Times, I mean, really? Get your shit together, Private Pile. The fund set up to compensate victims of Jeffrey Epstein's sexual exploitation has already received more than 100 claims and paid out tens of millions of dollars. Well, that's a good thing, in my opinion, right? I'm glad that there's payments starting to go out. I'm glad that some of these survivors are being made whole, and it's about time that this ball got rolling. There's been way too long of a pause. Way too many years in between these allegations, these trials, and now at least a little bit of restitution. So I'd like to see this keep going, and I'd like to see it accelerate. The number of claims has already surpassed expectations, even though the fund will accept requests until the end of March, said Jordana Feldman, its administrator and a lawyer who worked on the September 11th Victim Compensation Fund for many years. So it will accept requests all the way through the end of March. So there's still a lot of time for these girls who have not come forward to come forward and put down a claim and try and seek restitution for the abuse that they received at Jeffrey Epstein's hands. And I hope that all of these girls that are entitled to getting something from this program do just that. Ms. Feldman will not say how many claims have been paid, but so far, the fund has paid more than $30 million to accusers, according to a person familiar with the fund who spoke on the condition of anonymity. The fund is poised to reach additional settlements in the coming weeks. So, $30 million so far to Jeffrey Epstein's survivors, which is certainly a good start, but just a drop in the bucket of what his fortune on paper is. And again, I don't think that there should be $1 left in the hands of the estate when all is said and done. That's how many victims and survivors there are of Jeffrey Epstein. Again, we're not talking about, a 19-year-old guy, a kid who had relations with a 16 or 17-year-old girl. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about an abusive pervert who unequivocally was a monster who abused hundreds, if not thousands of girls. That's what kind of person we're talking about here. And that's why every last dollar of the fortune that he amassed, illegally or otherwise, should be put into the kitty, and all of the survivors of Jeffrey Epstein should wet their beak. The fund began taking claims in July, a little less than a year after Mr. Epstein, a financier, pedophile, died in a Manhattan jail cell following his arrest on federal sex trafficking charges. Because he had put his roughly $600 million fortune into a trust, there were concerns that it could take years for his survivors to get any money back from his estate. And I figured that it would take a while to get any money back for sure. I was thinking that it would take up to a decade maybe for these girls to start drawing money from this compensation fund, because that's how this kind of stuff usually works, right? They try and drag their feet. They make it as hard as possible. And it's just the way that the game is set up on tilt. So I was pretty shocked when we saw them talk about how the fund was going to be active so quickly. And now to see that it's paying out, that's definitely awesome, because the last thing that anyone needs, especially these survivors, I would guess, is more obstacles in the road, more impediments, more slowdowns. There's been plenty of that for plenty of years. And sometimes it's just time to get going and to keep moving instead of being stuck in neutral and having no outcome in a situation such as this. So now that there's starting to be some payouts and some of these girls are starting to, at the very least, be acknowledged for what occurred to them by Jeffrey Epstein, by this, and they're being recognized, right, by getting these payouts. The estate is saying, look, we know that this occurred and we're giving you restitution. And in my opinion, that's a very, very solid step, right? For them to, at the very least, acknowledge this abuse occurred. But also, I think it's the first step in these people paying the price criminally as well. But the estate's executors agreed to establish the fund, allowing accusers, including those who had reached settlements with Mr. Epstein after his 2008 conviction on soliciting prostitution from an underage girl, to seek compensation. The terms of individual settlements are confidential. And again, I really don't care what the payout is. That's not my business, right? Not my business at all. If the survivors and their lawyers are happy with the funds being offered, then that's great. I don't have an opinion one way or the other. I don't know what the figures are, and everybody's, situation is unique. To one of the survivors, X amount of dollars might be life-changing, and to another it might not be. So who knows, right? But if they sign on the dotted line and they take the settlement and them and their lawyers are happy with the settlement, then perfect. Then things are working as they should. Now, is that the case? Is that occurring? I don't know. I'm not privy to that information. But it's certainly a step in the right direction to read and to hear that over, $30 million has already been paid out. Each claim takes about 60 days to review, with the survivor interviewed over video because of the coronavirus pandemic, Ms. Feldman said. It gives the survivors an opportunity to tell their story, and it gives me an opportunity to get to know them in a way that can't fully be captured in a paper file, she said. I do see some of the rawness of the emotions. There is very deep, long-lasting impact that the abuse has had on their lives. Look, there's no doubt. I don't need to see them in an interview to know that, right? I don't need to sit down with them one-on-one to understand that their lives have been completely and utterly impacted by this man's abuse, by the behavior. And to hear it from Feldman, I think it just puts an exclamation point on it, right? Adds even that much more context and that much more weight. What occurred here and what happened to these girls is an abomination. And the fact that nobody stepped up to the plate to defend them or to demand justice for all of these years is a straight up embarrassment. One accuser who has received a settlement, according to court documents, was identified in the July 2019 federal sex trafficking indictment against Mr. Epstein as minor victim 1. She had accused him of sexually abusing her beginning when she was 14. That's always nice, huh? Good old Jeff Epstein and 14-year-old girls. He's a sick dude, folks. Was a sick dude. And if it wasn't for the fact that these survivors didn't get a chance to face him down in court, I wouldn't have cared one bit about him dying. I wouldn't have cared if he committed suicide. I wouldn't have cared if somebody killed him, whatever it may be. One less scumbag on the planet would have been totally fine with me. But the fact that he was never forced to face these girls in justice, in court, is just, it's just an extra slap in the face, right? Another unidentified woman who said in a lawsuit that Mr. Epstein had sexually abused her after promising to help her get a job with Victoria's Secret has also received compensation from the fund, according to court records. So Les Wexner should be held complicit in all of this, right? At the very least, he should be brought in and forced to give a statement under oath. And the lawyers that are questioning him during that deposition should go hard in the paint. Will that ever occur? I don't know. I'm not too confident that it will, if you want the God's honest truth. Les Wexner is still a very powerful man, still being protected by very powerful people. Even though Epstein and Maxwell were burned as assets, guys like Wexner, a little harder to drag them down, right? A little bit harder to topple them. Even though Jeffrey Epstein was given the keys to the castle and used that job, that position, to abuse girls, Les Wexner, who owned the company that Epstein was using, has still never had to answer for any of that. And I'm not saying, that he should be arrested with a SWAT team kicking in his door, though I wouldn't be too bummed about that. But I think he needs to come up and, at the very least, for a start, give a statement under oath about what occurred with Virginia, according to her allegations, and what occurred with him as far as his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. Mr. Epstein, for many years, had been the principal money manager to Leslie Wexner, the retail magnate who until this year was chief executive of the parent company of Victoria's Secret. In 2008, Mr. Epstein pleaded guilty in Florida to a charge of soliciting prostitution from a minor. Again, a minor can't be a prostitute. It's a ridiculous law in itself. It should have never even been a law. As part of that plea agreement, he avoided more serious federal charges, but was required to register as a sex offender. Not in New Mexico, he wasn't. What, you don't think that he mapped all of this out? You don't think that he was looking into the future, looking at the what ifs? Of course he was. And there are many reasons why Zorro Ranch was chosen. And the fact that he did not have to register as a sex offender there is very close to the top of the list, in my opinion. That plea, which later became the subject of much criticism, called on Mr. Epstein to reach settlements with about 24 survivors, but did not specify any amounts. As part of the agreement with prosecutors, Mr. Epstein was permitted to pay for his accusers' third-party attorneys, a process that raised suspicion among some survivor advocates. So, Epstein paid for the lawyers of the girls he was supposedly giving restitution to. What could possibly go wrong there? How could there possibly be a conflict of interest there? That is so absurd that the court would let that even happen and that the prosecutors would let that happen. How much more evidence is needed that non-prosecution agreement, in fact, that whole entire first trial, was an absolute farce? And yet here we are on the heels of the 11th Circuit Court hearing the case, and some of the judges still acting the fool. What more do they need? How much more evidence must be presented? Spencer Coven, a Miami lawyer representing 9 women who have submitted claims to the fund, said the settlement process appeared to be fair. None of his clients have yet to receive a settlement offer, but Mr. Coven said he was cautiously optimistic. And there you go. Like I said, if these lawyers and the girls are optimistic and they're happy with their settlements, then I really have nothing to say about it. It's not my business. Again, for me, the whole entire point is that these girls get restitution. Now, whatever the price is of that restitution, that's way above my pay grade, right? But the whole point was that the estate had to pay and pay dearly. I'll leave all of the particulars up to those who are paid to do that. 3 of them received settlements from Mr. Epstein when they were teenagers, but had felt intimidated by him and his legal team. This process is light years different, Mr. Coven said. And that's a good thing, right? The first time around, we know that it was a bully type situation. You're going to take this amount and that's going to be the end of that. Certainly wasn't giving out millions. My guess was he was giving out, $150,000, $200,000 settlements, somewhere around there. He wasn't paying out millions, though, I promise you that. And that's what these survivors deserve, millions of dollars. That's right, I said it, millions of dollars. Ms. Feldman said a person who received a settlement was normally barred from coming back for more money. But she said, given the circumstances surrounding the earlier investigation of Mr. Epstein, it was important not to close the door on any survivors. And that's a big deal for me. I think that's a good idea. It's usually I would be against that too, right? Someone coming around to get a second bite at the trough. I'd be against it because unfortunately, there are too many people that are out there playing games and using damning accusations such as this to try and get rich. This is obviously not a case like that. Now, are there some people who might try and do that? Of course. There's bad people everywhere, folks. But overall, in this case, when you look at it, survivor by survivor, case by case, it is rather obvious that the first time around, these girls were completely and utterly left on an island, no pun intended, by the federal government and completely trashed by Epstein's lawyers, and there was nobody there to stand up for them. So those girls from the first time around that got paid off, I'm glad that they're able to come back around for a second helping. Plans for the compensation fund were announced last year, but were delayed while the estate's lawyers addressed objections by the Attorney General of the Virgin Islands, Denise George. Miss George, whose office has filed a civil forfeiture lawsuit against Mr. Epstein's estate, had wanted more safeguards for the survivors because the executors were former business advisors to Mr. Epstein. And again, Denise George wasn't wrong about that, right? There are not enough safeguards in place when you're dealing with people like Indike and Khan, cunning and shrewd and heartless. So all the safeguards that are necessary should be put into place. And my only gripe with Denise George has and will always be the fact that she wants to get some of this money for the Virgin Islands. And my position there is the Virgin Islands does not have a leg to stand on. They are not getting any of this money, if it was up to me anyway. They're the ones who had officials put Jeffrey Epstein up and set him up with these tax havens and all this other jazz. Now they want redress? Here's an idea. Why don't you arrest those people that were in bed with Jeffrey Epstein, and then we could perhaps talk about a few bucks coming your way after every single survivor is made whole. But the other portions of Denise George's investigation, I love. The fact that she's involved in a civil racketeering case, aka a RICO case. Oh yeah, I'm digging that. You all know that's right up my alley. And all of the subpoenas she's firing off? Yup, love that as well. Mr. Epstein's primary residence for nearly 2 decades was an island he owned in the Virgin Islands, and the companies that constituted his business interests were mostly incorporated there. Mr. Epstein's estate has shrunk recently to about $400 million after paying $190 million in estate taxes to the federal government. You know, Uncle Sam's always going to have their hand out, right? Look, give us our $190 million in estate taxes. But we can't come to an agreement on a stimulus package for Main Street. Makes a whole lot of sense, right? The restitution fund, which is not limited in the amount it can dole out, is being financed with money from Southern Trust, one of Mr. Epstein's main companies in the Virgin Islands. Yeah, one of his shell companies. One of those very companies that we talk about when we're discussing the financials, when we talk about the FinCEN files or the Paradise Papers. That's exactly what Southern Trust was. And who knows where they got their money from. Until there's a forensic accountant diving in and digging in, we'll have zero idea where any of this money originated or where it went. One of Southern Trust's biggest clients was, Leon Black, the billionaire private equity executive who paid as much as $75 million in fees for tax and estate planning advisory services. In all, Southern Trust has raked in more than $200 million in revenue since 2012. They have a lot of money to work with, Mr. Coven said. And it's funny that Leon Black was involved with Southern Trust for $75 million, huh? That gives me 75 million reasons to drop a RICO subpoena right in Mr. Black's lap. And I hope beyond hope, after Denise George is done with her subpoena parade, that the SDNY gets on board and they start firing off that many subpoenas to all of Epstein's associates too. Because it is really quite obvious that Jeffrey Epstein was not only engaging in a wide-ranging sex trafficking criminal enterprise, but he was also fully immersed in the world of money laundering. If you'd like to contact me, you can do that at Bobbycapucci at protonmail.com. That's BOBBYCAPUCCI at protonmail.com. You can also find me on Twitter at BOBBY_CAPUCCI. All of the links that go with this episode can be found in the description box. As for me, I will be back tomorrow morning, but the morning update will be a little bit later than usual, expected around 9 a.m. or so. So that'll be in around 9 a.m., and then the usual daily drop will follow in the afternoon sometime, 4 or 5 o'clock, right around there. All right, folks, I hope everybody has a fantastic night, and I will talk to you all tomorrow morning.